We're live.
Okay, good morning. Well, welcome back to our third day. Um, Today we're going to have first we're going to have the business meeting following this, and then we'll go into the legislative initiatives presented by our AAFD Director of Public Affairs and Engagement, Keith Miller. And that's going to be followed by our third guest speaker, Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky.
And later on this afternoon at 3:00, we're going to have the open mic session. We want the attendees to share their concerns, their insights. This is your chance to take the floor. We'll share best practices, and we want to have a dialogue with our attendees. So please stay tuned for 3:00. Please join us. We look forward to it. And with that, let's invite Bob Pervin on for the business meeting. Bob, you there? There we go.
Thank you, guys. We really have very little business to conduct at this meeting. I think we've had incredibly great content, and appreciate all the folks that have joined us for it. We have over, as of yesterday, we were showing 220 people, or north of 220 people registered for this event. I will tell you that we don't have our final numbers yet, but the actual people dialing in has been well below those numbers, and with the exception of Senator Cortez Masto, the numbers have been not what we would like to see. The only thing I can conclude is that when we have you all at a meeting room at a hotel, we've got you locked in a room and everybody comes. But when you're at home and able to make choices, even though that you've registered to be there, because the numbers are, again, this is our first time ever in a virtual format, other than the town hall meetings that we did last year during the course of the pandemic that were very well attended. So we're going to have to take this back to our drawing room and evaluate huge investment to bring this conference to you virtually. We came up with a program allowing our chapters to for a very small cost to underwrite attendance because of virtualization. But it does not appear that we have brought as many people to this forum as we have done in our live forums in the past. So we'll have to figure that part out. The only other business really that I have to share with you folks is what I've been talking about a little bit. The AAFD has made amazing strides in the legislative arena, largely due to the excellent work and intuition, because he's not trained for this task, of Keith Miller, who you're going to be hearing from next. But we're going to be dependent upon you, our members, to really create our voice, to have our voices be heard. We always talk about strength in numbers, and strength in numbers, and very often you'll see a megaphone attached to that as a graphic. Well, our megaphone gets larger and larger as our numbers grow, and our ability to reach out to our congressmen and senators and local public officials and let them know that all is not well in franchising land is how we're going to get heard. In that same vein, I know, you know, that most of our chapters have among their top priorities is to having better deals mandated for them from their franchisors. It's not that they're against group purchasing. In fact, group purchasing was one of the things that probably attracted you to franchising. It's the lack of that group purchasing, the lack of supplier mandates, which are geared and negotiated to benefit your businesses, to lower your cost of doing business, and to increase your profits. We have a supplier mandate member benefit survey that we really want to get out there. It's been very disappointing in terms of the number of people that have actually taken that survey. But if we can build that number to over 1,000, we're going to have some great data that we'll be able to present to Congress, we'll be able to present to the Federal Trade Commission to make our case that we're not being dealt with squarely. So I'm going to urge, and we're going to redouble our efforts. We're going to republish the survey, not only should anybody that's out here listening to me take the survey, but really urge your fellows to do it. This is a way we can help ourselves. And I want to be real clear, because the survey has a dual purpose to it. Number one is what I've been talking about, the political implications of being able to speak out on supplier mandates and how they are abused by many franchisors. Secondarily, you're telling us the things that you would like to see us bring to you. The survey is all focused on generic types of products and services. We did that on purpose because these are things that no franchisor should have the right to mandate. They're not tied into the trademark. The franchisor may say that everybody's got to use Heinz ketchup in their restaurants, and that's part of our brand. That's actually been determined in various court cases, that anything that the franchisor can tie into their brand, they can mandate. But they can't mandate where you buy your insurance. They can't mandate where you get your phone service. It's an open question as to whether or not they can mandate how you process your payments. But we want to have that dialogue. And the AAFD, as a national association capable of itself generating enormous buying power, we stand there as an opportunity. So when you're filling out the survey, be having in your mind, gee, these are things that if the AAFD can find us a better price, we want to accomplish that. So I really don't have more to report to you guys in terms of a business meeting. We'll stay tuned to us in the future. Please communicate to us if you like the virtual. Our thought was that next year, where we're coming up on our 30th anniversary, and please make your plans to be with us in Mesa, Arizona. It's a beautiful city, a beautiful venue, a great place to be. And well, maybe not this year, but in most years it's very comfortable. And if it's not comfortable outside, it's going to be comfortable in our meeting rooms. To be with us to celebrate a great milestone for the AAFD. Our thought had been that we would try to have a virtualization and open some things, but I will tell you that we spent about $20,000 to bring this program to you, to have the virtual platform, and to do, actually I should say around $30,000 is what our total cost is going to end up being. And for the return of a couple hundred people, not sure that's worthwhile. So we're going to want to hear from you on that, and we'll be making a decision about the 30th anniversary as we move down the road. So with that, guys, and I don't know if I know we're scheduled to start, but I'm going to throw it back to you for any final comments that you guys might have. I know Keith's in the room, and Keith, do you want to say anything about your session coming up, or make any comments? This would be a good. The floor is yours. Except for we can't hear you.
Unmute.
I was listening to a video that we're playing later because I hadn't heard it yet. Nope. So people can tune into my session, which I guess will start in a couple minutes here after they wrap up. And then also at 10:30, 1:30, depending what coast you're on and everything in between, make sure you tune in to the session with Representative Schakowsky. That was what I just got. It'll be a video of her, a fairly short, it'll be 7-minute video, but there will be a couple big announcements in that short video. So quality, not quantity, right? That's what's important. And we'll talk about those after she has her chance to publicly announce what she has to say. How's that for a teaser?
Yeah, we've been, and I don't know how many people are actually watching us at this program, but if we do have people there, I want to reiterate the encouragement to come at our open mic session, and because again, this is our chance to hear from our attendees, hear what's on your mind, and what we can accomplish. All right, with that, guys, back to the program chairs, and thank you guys. again, I don't know how many people are out here listening to what we're saying, but Stephen and Brian, you've done a fabulous job for us, and appreciate all of your efforts, and especially, and Brian, for pinch hitting on our opening session when Craig had to pull out, and Stephen, you've been working on that session with me for the last couple of years. So
yeah, 18 months. Yeah, absolutely.
So anyway, back to you guys.
Thanks, Bob. And I don't think we have much to add. I do encourage everybody, like Stephen had said, to join us for the open mic. It really is a great part of this program that gives you the opportunity to give us your feedback. So AAFD really knows what the members want and how we can improve. So look forward to it.
Yeah, well, we want to hear from you. So make sure you attend, okay? Come back at 3.
Okay. All right. I think it's over to Keith.
Over to Keith. Go ahead, Ben.
Okay, so we are going to start on the legislative session as my wife's getting off the computer in the background. And one of the covers on my window just came off. So it might be a little bright in the background. I never use this office this time of day. I'm usually busy making sandwiches. So for about the next hour, we're going to talk about our legislative initiatives and go into some fairly detail about things. I do want people to know the chat box is open. I will be watching that. I know we can't ask questions verbally back and forth, but hopefully people do ask some questions. I expect some questions, and that'll make the session move a lot easier. So go ahead, next slide. So Amy, the next slide then. So let's talk about the federal, there we go, our federal initiatives and things that are happening federally. So as we got a lot, both federally and state, some local, but it's pretty hard to, it's bad enough to get federal in 50 states going. So we've heard multiple times, and we heard from the senator herself on the Cortez Master report. The main thing is read the report. You know, it's 87 pages. It's about 47 pages of meat, but we really need people to be reading that report. After you read that report, I'm sure any franchisee is going to be happy with that report, as it calls out many of the things that we've talked about on, you know, the group purchasing and other things. So make sure you contact her office, and I will later give you an email to do that, because you want to show her office the support for that report. That report was 15 months in the making. It kept very private. It's very hard to keep secrets in Washington, but we managed to do it. And it was 15 months of work to get not only the report put together, but the approval. It's very detailed to get approval to release a Senate report and have it posted on the website. So Bob, I guess, since we started early, is that true? We want to wait a few minutes and have me start over again? And Bob, you can come into the session for a second if you want.
There you go. Yeah, we ended our business meeting a little bit early, Keith, and I'm worried that some people were looking at the agenda and we're going to start up when Joe, and I would hate to have you already be into the middle. So my recommendation would be to redial, start
Okay.
where you're supposed to start.
That's fine. Let's put it there. Let's hold that slide for 5 minutes. Let's go ahead and pull us off of the
You don't want to go back to your beginning?
Well, that is kind of the beginning. Which beginning? Okay. Yeah, that's the beginning.
I don't know what, I thought you had a couple of slides before that. But
nope, that's anyway, the first slide.
I apologize to people that are out there listening, because but I'm suspicious that a lot of people said I'm going to skip the business meeting, but I do want to hear Keith. and I want to hear Keith from the beginning. So that's what our.
All right. So
that's what
let's pull both Bob and I off the screen for 5 minutes, and we'll go live at 8:20 sharp. Good morning, everyone. It's still morning all across the country. So my name's Keith Miller, and I'm the Director of Public Affairs and Engagement for the AAFD. This morning, we're going to go through the legislative initiatives that we're working on and that you can help us work on. And I think that's the most important thing, that you can help us work on. So we're going to go through a PowerPoint presentation where I'm going to go through quite a bit of detail on things that we're working on, because I want you to see the level of detail that we are working on, and most of all, how you can help with that. So go ahead, Amy, and start with the slides. So we're going to start out with the federal initiatives that we're working on. Over the last 2 days, we've heard about the Senator Cortez Masto report. And in fact, we heard from the senator on Wednesday. It's an 87-page report, about 43 pages of meat in the report. And then it has end notes and for reference to all the materials that it looks at. And also it took in all of the comments that were made to the FTC franchise rule workshop, because there were hundreds of comments from franchisees, in a sense, more complaints of what was happening in their system. So most importantly, for people to read the report, in the chat box, we have Zoe has put the link to read that report. I think you'll be impressed with the report, the level of detail. And, you know, it's interesting on one, when Franchise Times interviewed me about that report, which was 15 months in the making. We actually started on that report prior to the pandemic starting, which the pandemic did make it easier to get everything done. But the detail to get through that report and get a Senate report released through Senate Legal and everything else is quite an accomplishment. Especially keeping it in secret during that whole time. The thing, you know, when I was quoted in Franchise Times on the report, the comment I made was really the report didn't so much have any new news. It was the fact that it took all of the stories and put them in one place. And it really showed how over time, because some of the stories were older, like Curves and even Quiznos, how some of the stories may have been years old. But then we have brand new stories that, in a sense, are the same story, and nothing has changed. And that's what we need to really get to is, you know, we need to get past this, that all is perfect in the franchise industry. The franchise model is a great business model, but that doesn't mean it doesn't need oversight, and that doesn't mean it's perfect. And of course, from our side, well, you know, we don't want to wipe out franchisors. We want them to be successful. But we want to be the strong advocate for the franchisees and making sure they're successful. So one thing in that report, and I will get this information out later to people, is you need to contact her office and just express your support for that report. And actually, Amy, you have Carol's email. You might put that in the chat box. That's the contact in Cortez Masto's office. Carol Wayman, she accepted the award last night for the senator. She has been working tirelessly behind the scenes to push our franchise causes. But just send a note saying thank you for your report. Tell them what brand you're part of and how that report resonates with you, because you may have the same problems. The next thing to do with that report is contact your own senator. And we will later show you how to contact your senator and House members, so all your federal officials, but to express your support of the report, that you need to say, look, this report is accurate. It recognizes the issues in franchising that we need to correct, and tell your own story of why that report is important to you. So that's what to do with the Cortez Masto report. Very important that we support her. She and her staff took a lot of risk and a lot of effort to put that report out. We want to make sure they recognize that we see it and appreciate it. So now it's almost 2 years ago, I actually testified in a Senate banking committee as a witness for Senator Cortez Masto. It was a session on economic mobility and is the American dream still alive? And it really was not a session about franchising, but she shoehorned the subject in there and allowed me to testify. And I actually got about 18 to 19 minutes of talking time between question and answers and my 5-minute statement, bringing up a lot of the issues that, in a sense, ended up in the report. After that session, and that was a previous Senate session, she introduced the SBA Franchise Transparency Act. Obviously, that Senate session ended, and she has again this year reintroduced that act. It requires specific disclosures for brands receiving SBA loans, and those specific disclosures are in the disclosure document, it would have to have first year revenues for stores, because if you get an SBA loan, you have to have first year revenues. And it would also require them to list the first year failures. That's important because you don't have a first year revenue if you don't even make it a year alive in that brand. So that is basically a foundational piece of legislation. And for many people, you may look at it and say, well, that really doesn't impact me. I'm not getting an SBA loan. I already own a franchise. But think back to when you were being disclosed on your franchise. Your brand probably does get SBA loans, even if you did not get an SBA loan. And think about if it would have changed your mind if you knew what the first year revenue for your brand was and your first year failures were for that brand. It's many of the really bad brands. I think the answer would have been no. People would not have bought that franchise that they bought if they had that level of disclosure. So this, again, is foundational and very important to have out there, even though it may not directly impact you now, because we could need to build up from that foundation and try to go after things that we can make a difference in. The other reason it's important is the SBA, of course, is guaranteeing loans. Well, basically you are, as a taxpayer, guaranteeing those loans. And you would hope the SBA did better due diligence than they're doing today on guaranteeing those loans. By guaranteeing those loans, most franchise buyers figure the government has vetted what has happened, that brand. I mean, why would the government be guaranteeing a loan to a brand that they don't vet? And but they don't vet it. And so that's why it's important. You know, the government is basically becoming an enabler for some of these bad brands. You know, we've heard the Burger M story, and Burger M's a chapter of the AAFD. There were over 100 SBA loans to that brand. I mean, without the SBA loans initially, that brand may not have even been able to survive, you know, up to 100 franchise sales instead of the 1,500 they did. So it really has become the enabler. Bill number 1120, and again, we'll go in more detail of how you do your contact, but you need to contact your senator. We need to get more co-sponsors on that. Currently, the co-sponsors are Senators Feinstein, Baldwin, Murphy, and Warren. So if those are one of your senators, when you contact them, you will actually just thank them for their support. But we need more support on those, especially Republican support on it. And I don't understand why we don't get more Republican support on this, because the Republicans should be very much in favor of a government program that guarantees money having better oversight. Next slide. So this bill, if you heard from Senator Cortez Masto 2 days ago, the SBA Franchise Loan Disclosure Act, this bill would require that the SBA publish default rates by brand on their website. We have some brands that have default rates of 25, 50%, yet people are still getting SBA loans, and nobody knows when they're buying that brand that the default rate is that high. And it's ridiculous that that's not part of the disclosure or basically information that people are able to get. It again is a foundational piece of legislation because it won't affect all of you. That bill number, by the way, is 2162. That bill was just introduced on Tuesday, the day before our conference. And so 2162, S.dots 2162. It really provides transparency for all franchisees, even if they don't get an SBA loan. You know, you got to remember that franchisees, and most of you will fall into one of these categories, that you either use family money, you used your savings, you got a regular bank loan, you maybe drew equity on your house, you maybe used your retirement program, retirement funds under the Rollover for Business Startup, or ROBS program. 99% of franchisees are borrowing some level of money to open their business. And wouldn't it be nice to know what the SBA default rate was? If you knew the default rate was 25% on SBA loans, would you be tapping into your funds to do that? So on the slide I had not introduced yet, that has changed. It has been introduced. As I said, we will need co-sponsor. Senator Warren is the only co-sponsor at this point. So the next item under federal initiatives is the FTC private right of action. We heard from Commissioner Chopra yesterday, being pretty frank about the failures and lack of oversight that he feels the FTC has done to protect small business owners. The problem is, even if there's a violation of the franchise rule, a franchisee cannot sue based on a violation of that rule. A franchisee can sue if they can show fraud, but a level of fraud, we had that discussion with Attorney Zarco yesterday of kind of the difference between fraud and wrongful disclosure. I mean, wrongful disclosure can be accidental. Fraud has to be, you pretty much have to prove intent, which is a much higher bar to hit. So if the FTC isn't going to act, and the FTC won't be acting on individual cases, obviously, they can't handle every individual case. It'd be more groups of franchisees in one brand. If they're either unwilling or unable to enforce the franchise rule, the franchisee should have a right to go to court and have their day in court on that. Next slide. And we may have an announcement on that last one later today. Fair Franchising Act. This is the big one. This is where we really have to get to. And I'm going to go in some detail of what an act will have. Representative Ellison a few years ago did introduce a Fair Franchising Act. Actually, it was very similar to the Coble-Conyers bill that was introduced in 1999. And we have, models ready to go, in a sense, with a new Fair Franchising Act that has been updated. It's very comprehensive, and it'll impact all franchisees. Things in that bill, it'll obligate the parties to act in good faith. It's always funny when I testify on a bill and it has good faith and fair dealing. I'm not the lawyer, so I get to jokingly say, so what part of good faith and fair dealing, franchisors, are you against? And it's always good for show, I guess, at a hearing, except obviously good faith and fair dealing have also very specific legal terms. This bill would create additional disclosure requirements. It would be much more detailed. It would include the things that we put in the SBA bill for disclosure. And so it would tighten up a lot of the disclosure issues. I believe, if I remember, it also does have something in there limiting waivers or the disclaimers we talked about yesterday, where you get all these numbers, and when you sign the franchise agreement, you also sign a document that says you didn't rely on anything outside of the disclosure document. So it does some cleanup on that. Provides freedom of association protections, basically First Amendment right type of things. They can't go after you. They can't retaliate because you're a member of your association. Luckily, there are probably a dozen states that have that in their own state law, but we need to put that in federal law. Provides for termination protections. It'll protect you, but it won't save you if you, in a sense, deserve to be terminated. People always go, why do you want bad franchisees to stay in the system? Look, I'm a franchisee like many of you. I don't want a bad franchisee in my system, and I don't think any of you do either. That said, franchisees should always have a due process before they're terminated. I mean, when they're being terminated, their equity in their business, their investment is being wiped out. And you look at what we do with criminals and the due process and the rights they have. Franchisees deserve at least certain rights before they're terminated. So in there, it allows for a cure period that, unless it's an immediate health and safety issue, you have a cure period to fix it. It restricts things like being terminated for quotas. More and more, we're hearing that, if you can be put in default for not signing up X amount of people on a loyalty program, for example, and people are being put in default for that. Too many items actually are being put into default that aren't major issues in the franchise agreement. And we define good cause on termination, and good cause has to be substantial non-compliance with the franchise agreement, not little ticky-tack things. It limits required pricing issues. And if the franchisor is going to require a price or advertise a price, there needs to be a business case behind it. It can't just be, and we talked yesterday a little bit about advertising funds and how advertising funds are being used to profit the franchisor and squeezing the margins of the franchisees. If you are terminated, it provides for fair compensation if the franchisor takes possession of any property. I always use the example, as you know, I'm a Subway franchisee. We have bread ovens. I bought that bread oven. And even if I'm the worst franchisee in the world and deserve to be terminated, if the franchisor comes in and takes my business, that's still my bread oven. It's a private property issue, and they need to buy that bread oven. So this looks at fair compensation if the franchisor takes possession, looking at the fixtures, equipment, any supplies, and things like that. Last thing, or not last thing, because there's another page of this, because I told you it was comprehensive, provides for hours of operations limitations. If you're going into a deal and you think you're only open X amount of hours, and the franchisor now, via usually the ops manual, adds hours of operations, they may not be profitable to you. Every hour percentage of any sale, it's usually not necessarily profitable to the franchisee. Some businesses will always be a 24-hour business. If you own a hotel, people are sleeping there overnight. It's a 24-hour business. But hours of operation are important, even in businesses that we think, like convenience stores that maybe were open 24 hours. This is a new world right now. And one, it's dangerous. I mean, we're hearing a lot more hold-up shootings, things like that. And many franchisees are afraid to either themselves or have an employee work during overnight hours. And we're in a real labor crunch right now. My own franchisor is pushing on us to increase our hours, and yet I can't staff the hours that I already am open. Next slide. Provides for limitations on liquidated damages. This become a huge deal, especially in a lot of failing chains. Old Stone Creamery, which was a chain that was failing, was very famous for this, as they're losing store after store after store. Very tough liquidated damages clauses were being invoked, up to 5 years of royalties if you closed early. Most liquidated damages clauses I see today are looking at your last 12 months of sales. And if you close before the end of your term, they're going to require you to pay 3 years of royalties and advertising funds, 3 to 5 years. And it usually is or until the end of the contract, whichever is shorter. Even if that's not in there, I believe most courts would rule that they're not entitled to any more than the end of the contract. We're looking at a bill that would limit liquidated damages to 12 months of liquidated damages. And it would also look at if it was the franchisor that terminated you and then kept the store open, took possession and kept the store open, they shouldn't be entitled to any liquidated damages, because that business is still operating. If they're getting liquidated damages from you and that location reopens, it's double dipping as far as I'm concerned. Bans discrimination between franchisees. Again, we talked about that a little yesterday, where we have some brands that have large franchisees that are getting better deals and actually undercutting and have a competitive advantage against their own brand franchisees. Look, if one set of royalties is being charged, it should be getting charged on everything. If you're having to buy goods and services through the franchisor or through their approved supplier, one shouldn't be getting a deal just because they've cut a better deal with the franchisor and get that kind of competitive advantage. Everybody should be treated somewhat equally. Now, we want to be careful in this because we don't want a franchisee to necessarily not be able to get help from the franchisor. And I was talking about this with one franchisor, and they said, look, I had a franchisee who was undergoing cancer treatment in stage 4. And she goes, I don't want to collect royalties from him right now. He's got bigger problems. And, you don't want to, in a sense, overstep and ban acts of kindness while you're trying to solve acts of fairness. Provides transfer protections. It really looks at you having the right to transfer, a transfer being approved reasonably. Language that we had in California actually requires the franchisor to provide the approval standard for a new franchisee, and that's the approval standard for a transfer. So we try to get away from these items of a franchisor disproving a buyer only because they want someone else to buy it, or they want to disprove that buyer to buy your outlet and then sell them a brand new outlet because then they make more money off of that. We want reasonable authority to be able to transfer. We want to limit how long it takes for them to approve it and allow you to see the equity in your business at the end. Provides for renewal rights, requires notice, requires cause for not renewing, and it talks about what should be in that renewal. Again, we talked about that yesterday with the session with Zarco and how different a renewal can be versus from where you started. And there's some level of reasonable expectation of if you're renewing an agreement, it should be somewhat similar to that. Next item is kind of double hit, actually, the First Amendment right. Well, actually, First Amendment rights of franchisees attacks the non-disparagement clauses, those ones that say you can't say anything negative about your brand to anyone or on any social media or anything else. Problem with that, as we talked about yesterday, is even the FTC says as part of their instructions in looking at a new franchise, you should contact existing franchisees. Well, if existing franchisees or past franchisees are all prohibited from telling you the truth that it was a bad experience, what good is it to contact them? So we need to protect some First Amendment rights. Now, you got to be careful and not overstep that bound. Oops, go back one slide. Not done with that one yet. You got to be careful of you don't want to bash your brand and with untruths just for the fact of doing it. And I would always tell everyone, it's okay to say, I guess, negative things sometimes internally about your franchise, but you need to be very careful in talking about your product or service in a negative light, because that does in fact hurt your business. The bill would ban pre-dispute arbitration clause. That's a big thing right now, because we tend to have to go to the home state of the franchisor in front of arbitrators that are friendly with that franchisor. And most very important, this bill would not preempt state laws. So the thing is, this will not happen without bipartisan co-sponsors. We will not have that introduced until we get both Democrat and Republican co-sponsor on it. I mean, the bill is sitting in Cortez Masto's office. We don't want her to introduce it until we get a bipartisan co-sponsor on it. So as you're contacting legislators and talking about your issues, maybe it's just the SBA bill, you want to bring up the big thing that we need long-term is we need some protections. Here's why I need these protections. I've kind of given you a list of what the bill would have in it. And if any of those impact you, it's a perfect opportunity to talk to them about it and get co-sponsors. Next slide now. So how to contact your federally elected officials. Senate, very easy, senate.gov, and the House is house.gov. When you go into the Senate website, you'll be able to look at a list of senators. You'll just have to go by your state and find, you'll have 2 senators, obviously. Click on their name, and there will be a contact page, which basically creates an email. Now, when you do that, I'm from California, so if I go into either Feinstein's or Padilla's, it's only going to allow me to use that contact page if I'm from California. So they only want to hear from constituents. They don't want, people crossing and just sending them from any state. It keeps a lot of the automated stuff where 100,000 people or 10,000 people are sending the same letter in. So you will need to be a constituent. House.gov, the House website, up in the top part of that web page, there will be a zip code lookup. You will be able to enter your zip code there, and it'll pull up who your representative is. It may require you to put it in an address after that because some zip codes have 2 representatives. But you'll be able to find your representative and keep that information. Again, you need to go to their website and get their contact page. It'll again ask if you're a constituent. On both of these, it'll also provide a phone number. Phone works great for House because House offices are a lot smaller, a lot less people they're dealing with. A phone call and having a discussion with or providing information on the phone will get to the proper people. You don't want to get in too much into the weeds. The person answering the phone is probably going to be a volunteer clerk or somebody doing a summer job there, so they're not going to know the details of anything. If you do call a House website, you might ask to talk to either the legislative director or the person who handles small business issues. And that might get you in contact with someone who makes a bigger impact. So when you contact either your senator or your House, you always want to clearly, obviously, give your name, give your brand, but very important to also give the number of outlets you have in their district or state and the number of people you employ. That adds up in their minds. And you want to always talk about how the policies, your ability to either open more outlets or keep your outlets open, and to employ people and pay good wages. Look, right now, the Democrats have a majority. One of their big issues is wages. That they will push higher minimum wage very heavily. And it's important to think about that of industries like mine, the QSR industry, and many of us in franchising are on the lower wage scales and lower skill levels of employees. But a lot of what we are able to pay is driven by what our franchisors are doing. If our franchisors in fast food are out there pushing dollar menus, it's pretty difficult to pay $15 wages. Our franchisor in Subway, again, to use an example, we're at $14 minimum wage in California. The Chick-fil-A by me is now paying $18 an hour starting wage, and they're still sending out $3.49 6-inch coupons. How much labor do you think that $3.49 pays for of that basically $15 I'm paying in wages? When possible, and we will, as we go through time going forward, we'll probably do something on this new SBA bill real soon. We will provide an outline of what you want to send to the senator or House member. In this case, that bill is a Senate bill, so it'll be contacting your Senate office. We will provide talking points. We will provide an outline of what we're going against. Just because Darren popped in a thing, what organizations, lobbyists will be fighting these? The International Franchise Association has always fought any changes to laws, every state law, every bill I've gotten introduced, they call it an anti-franchise law. And what makes it difficult is they claim to represent franchisees too. And they do, in cases, represent franchisees. I don't believe they properly do in this case. And but the tides turn. We have a window, and it's interesting because from a political sense, I would say most small business owners tend to be to the right of center, and yet it's the Democrats who have tended to step up to protect the rights of franchisees currently. That hasn't been historically been true. I always joke the first state legislation that looked at franchising, which was a disclosure franchise law, was in California. And people laugh and they go, well, that figures. California is always first for every new regulation and law. But that law was signed into law in 1970. And the governor of California in 1970 was none other than Ronald Reagan. Now, I'm pretty sure Ronald Reagan isn't viewed as a liberal Democrat in many circles. So it used to be much more bipartisan. Unfortunately, the Republican Party, and I'm a lifelong Republican, they say they support small business, but they don't tend to support small business when big business disagrees with the small business. And let's face it, your franchisor is big business, and you, me, and the rest of us franchisees are small business. So again, when possible, we'll provide an outline. If your member of Congress has a town hall, maybe a tele town hall, get on that town hall, talk about franchise issues, talk about the bill. If you know you're going to be on one, people can always email me. I can give them a talking point or two, especially if I know who their representative is. Attend fundraisers. Talk about franchise issues at fundraisers, and people go, well, I don't want to necessarily contribute, or I don't know if I support that person. Well, you can usually go to a lot of fundraisers for $100 for, they may have appetizers or something, but there's a lot of low-level fundraisers that you can attend. And I would say attend both the Democrat and the Republican, or if you're in a state that's more independent, the independent. Attend them both and get a chance. They'll see you and they'll remember you, even if it's only $100 contribution to attend that. They know you came to a fundraiser of theirs, but it gives you a chance to meet them and talk about franchise issues. No, we're not going to become a multi-billion-dollar PAC. I can't afford to attend $2,500 fundraisers or higher either, but there are times. I mean, it's basically take every single chance you have. If you have to contact your representative, contact their office, invite them to your business, give them a tour of your business and tell them what your challenges are. It's not hard. And the best part is, except for the fundraiser, I guess, all of this is free. Doesn't cost you anything. Usually doesn't take that much time. And so that's the key. I mean, most franchisees, as Jim Glover, I think, told me the other day, the trouble with us franchisees is most of us can't afford the complimentary free hour from a lawyer. So let's see. How can the AAFD compile this? Reed, it's hard to come up with a list of those. If we can get them even from our own membership, and I think the first step for us is going to be trying to get everyone to get their members of their association and get a list of who their senator, actually, if they, I know their state, I know their senator, but get their senators and House representatives listed. So, you know, a lot of times when I'm working on these things, I'm trying to find, okay, this bill is going to this committee, who's on that committee, and what franchisees do I know are in the representative that's on that committee. So it's more important. It's difficult to get a mass thing of who the franchisees are. But if between AAFD and most of you know, I work with other groups also, if we can get all the groups to, in a sense, get a database of who their members are and who their representatives are, that takes a big step in being towards being effective. Next slide. So let's move to state issues for a while and kind of what can be done and where we've been. This last year, we got a bill introduced in Oregon. Representative Janelle Bynum introduced it. She is a McDonald's franchisee, I believe has 3 outlets in Oregon. So here we have a representative who is also a franchisee, who's obviously very friendly to us. It was a comprehensive franchise bill, covered many of those things I talked about in the federal law that we're looking at, but it failed in committee. We had multiple hearings on it, but it's very difficult in a COVID year to do Zoom meetings and kind of parse through a comprehensive bill. We were never really able to get any of the Republicans to move in favor of it, but they weren't necessarily opposed to it. They saw issues. They just felt it was too complicated of a bill to pass through kind of on the fly doing remote meetings. We also had really not enough franchisee support. When we did have a live or a hearing, a Zoom hearing, the opposition pulled up as many franchisees to fight against us as supporting us. Why? There's multiple reasons why franchisees will testify against us. Number one, they're in a good franchise brand and they don't need the legislation and they don't understand why the government needs to be involved. Again, most small business owners and franchising probably tend to be a little right of center and don't feel the government's always there to help them and are leery of that. So if things are good by you would probably be anti-government. You know, so they're a good franchise. They have a good franchisor. Of course, I always have to caution them. You have a good franchisor now, but if you really read your contract, it's not a great contract. And if your franchise sells tomorrow, you may not be in such a good situation. The other problem we have, quite frankly, is franchisees currying favor with their franchisor. They're doing their franchisor a favor, and maybe they're getting something in return, like a discount on their next location or getting a great new location that someone else wouldn't be able to get. And finally, it's probably not, franchisees aren't ignorant, but it may be some ignorance to the subject or is telling them. Almost every time when I get a franchisee testifying against me on this, they're saying, well, we don't want bad franchisees in our brand, and this bill would make it difficult to terminate franchisees, which it doesn't. As I step through, it's about giving a due process. It's not about protecting a bad franchisee. The interesting thing is when it never got voted on in committee, but when it basically got held over and said it wouldn't be going through in this session, the Republican vice chair at the end of that session, committee hearing, took time. He basically stated, I want to make this on public record that I believe there are many issues brought forward in this franchise bill that we need to be concerned about and we need to act on. act upon. And he committed to working with Representative Bynum to bring back the next session. The next session, short session, so it'll be even faster to get through. But he wanted to tackle the major issues. And he stated that he had talked to a couple of the franchisors that had contacted him and told them of his intent to get something done and to work with the Representative Bynum on getting something through. Darren asked if it's parallel to the national initiatives. It's very similar. It's not identical, but it's very similar, yes. Next slide. So a couple other states that we still have something active in California, Representative Holden, Assemblymember Holden, has introduced a bill. Assemblymember Holden was the sponsor of the bill in 2015 that we passed in California to make major changes to the California Franchise Relations Act. So there's two laws in California. You'll see them listed there. The CFIL, that's the California Franchise Investment Law. It's the California Franchise Relations Act. So one is pre-signing of the franchise agreement, and the second one is a relationship law, which is after you sign the franchise agreement. So this bill is actually fairly short because many of the things that we would want are already law in California, but there needed to be some cleanup of some stuff. It's like everything else. When you go back and read how it got put forward, you might do some cleanup of the legislation. We are also probably, it's not in there yet, going to add a private right of action and on the investment law. And one of the things we have in here, and we found multiple franchise agreements that franchisees are signing, that in the franchise agreement, they actually waive they're a franchisee in California, and the contract waives the provisions of the laws in California. Now, whether that would be upheld in court is questionable, but judges can rule either way sometimes. So we just want to clarify that if you have a location in California, you can't waive the provisions in California. By the way, you ask who fights this. The IFA, when they saw that provision in the franchise agreement, they fought it because they said, well, what if the franchisor is in Pennsylvania and the franchisee's company is in Nevada, because that's where they've incorporated? That shouldn't, it's a Nevada company writing a contract with a Pennsylvania company. California law shouldn't apply. And our take is, if your location is in California, California law should apply. So that bill has been introduced. Again, because of COVID, it wasn't a priority bill. I knew when it was introduced, we would hold it over until the second year of the session. So California has 2-year sessions, and bills can stay active for 2 years. So the last state bill that we have going right now is in New Jersey. This was put forth by a group of hotel owners there, and so it only impacts the hospitality industry at this point. But it really goes after the rebates and kickbacks that we've been talking about and requiring disclosure of them. And quite frankly, I believe the bill requires any monies paid by the franchisees for the purchases should go back to the franchisees. Well, you look at it and go, well, it's hospitality only, it doesn't affect me. This was a strategic move to do it hospitality only because it would limit the opposition on it. I mean, obviously McDonald's isn't going to go fight a bill that's only hospitality. But if we can get it passed for the hospitality industry, think how much easier it is to go in and in a sense, erase the word hospitality and have it apply to all franchises. Next slide. As I jokingly say at times, the sandwich guy does have a little strategery at times. So one question would be, what about your state? Can we do something in your state? And the answer is, of course we can. But it takes some work from people in that state. It's pretty hard for us, whether AAFD, from an AAFD perspective, to really have connections and organizations in 50 states. Maybe even the IFA is, as was pointed out earlier, is a multi-million-dollar operation, and even they have a difficult time doing a lot of state legislation. So we need someone who has a legislative contact. We need someone who that contact or one of the contacts will sponsor a bill. We need a working group of franchisees. And when I say a working group, it can't just be one group. One of the challenges I have, 7-Eleven, which 7-Eleven, by the way, is a brand new member of the AAFD. And so we appreciate them joining on into our forces and helping us in our causes. We can't have only 7-Eleven franchisees fighting this, because then in the Capitol, it gets called a 7-Eleven bill. And it's harder to pass sweeping franchise legislation if only one brand is represented. So you need multiple brands. I always kind of say, look, I really want about 8 to 10 people from 4 to 5 different brands that are committed to work in that state. Once we get to that point, we can always provide sample language of a bill to introduce. And there's a couple different ways you can go on that sample language. The bill we introduced in Oregon was a very detailed bill, very specific. In California, the law is very specific and detailed. You go to a state like Washington, and it's a much shorter law. And a lot of times the lawyers like that more because there's more interpretation you can put into the law on things. The sample legislation we provide usually will depend on who you get as a sponsor. Some sponsors like every detail spelled out. Some sponsors like broader, more generic legislation. And people ask in California, why did you go so specific? And Bob Pervin would know this, because we had one committee to get through in the Assembly, Business and Professions, that at the time had a chair who wanted very detailed specifics in the legislation on what it did and didn't do. And therefore, to get past her committee, we had to make sure we are very specific. So you kind of have to pivot. You can't, one size doesn't fit all. You have to pivot with politically what you're working with and how to get something passed. We can help organize Capitol visits days for you. It's not that hard to set up meetings. You just need the people attending and what they want to be talking about. And this Capitol visit would either be state or federal too. I mean, I've organized multiple federal visit days for people, and usually try to do, get the local franchisees to fund it. The cost of doing the visit days is inexpensive, but it's nice to have a reception afterwards that you can still do off-site, but across the street or something that invites legislators over. We can provide assistance for hearings. It may be a direct hearing on a franchise bill. It may be something different. I mean, there's issues that have come up that have affected franchisees in states that you may want to hear on, or that you may want to put your 2 cents in on. We can provide assistance and talking points on those hearings. But in the end, it's up to you. It's that old, we can lead a horse to water, but we can't make it drink. And there's only so much we can do. And it does take some commitment and time from the franchisees. Next slide. So that's all I have of detail to go through. So I'm going to more open it up to the chat. I know it's not a Ring Central call. And Bob Pervin, if you want to step in, if you're still in the batter's box, so to speak, if you want to step in and make some comments. But I'd like to hear in the chat from some of you. Oh, he's on it as an attendee. Well, can't he log back on? So I'll give it a couple seconds for if Bob wants to try to come in and into the live show. Okay, he says he's coming back into session so he can make some comments. But for those of you who are listening, any questions you have, you can put in the chat box, and we'll spend a few minutes on this before we sign off. There he is.
Yeah, I was in your audience, and terrific presentation.
Were you booing or applauding? I just want to make sure here. You know?
I was applauding and trying to figure out how to. It was my first time. I've discovered I can't be both in the stream and in the audience without creating a terrible echo, so I abandoned. But I guess the only thing I want to kind of come in behind you. You actually said this yourself, but it has been confusing. And Keith and I have talked about this on many occasions. How franchising issues are partisan. And actually, Keith and I have both focused and several, Keith much more than I, on really targeting Republican support to come in. Interestingly, when we were dealing in California, one of the committee chairs on the Republican side that we were able to win over had been president of the California Car Dealers Association before he became. And was he a senator or
he was an assembly? He was an assemblyman then. Now he's a senator. Now
he's a senator, and but I was able to go to him peer to peer and say, "Hey, we both are presidents of franchisee associations. We need your support." And he actually brought quite a few Republicans along with him. Keith, maybe you can. I'm sure you have better recollection than I do on that matter.
Yeah, it was interesting. When we had our first floor vote, well, we had a committee vote that would send it to the floor, and Scott Wilk is his name, and he's still a senator. He, as we're walking out of the committee, he pulls me aside and he goes, "I'll get you 5 Republicans on the floor." And I'm like, "Well, that would be great. You know, I'll believe it when I see it." As we got 5 Republicans. Plus, I think that was in addition to him, Senate to the Senate. The interesting thing about that day was I think we only had a handful of Republicans that voted against the bill, and a vast majority of the Republicans went neutral and no position or not voting on the bill. And that really changed things overnight. That day, the IFA now knew it was in favor of us, and they were in trouble, and they quickly came to us to negotiate some improvements to the bill, which we did in the end do. And some of the improvements did make the bill better. But that was a monumental moment. It was kind of a funny moment for me too, when we walked out of that room. I go, all my life and everything I've ever done on this legislative front, I've always been the underdog. Been the David against Goliath. And right now I'm Goliath. Now I can only screw it up, right? Because your mentality is when you're the underdog, if you pull it off, everybody's impressed. I've never had, legislatively, I've never had that position of, oh no, now I'm the only guy who can screw it up.
Yeah, and to that point, Keith, I never thought about it until you just said it just now. But when you're the underdog, you can just fight for the cause, and the specifics, because you don't expect to win, are I have to be careful that what we craft makes sense for everyone.
So I'm looking in the chat box. James Nolan has asked, is there anything to consider change if your brand's home office is international? They have a U.S. address, but their operations are in Canada. Actually, that's kind of a fun one, because when we talk about franchisors squeezing the margins, like on product purchases or whatever, it's not only taking the money out of the community, it's actually taking it out of the country. And we have this situation with 7-Eleven. I mean, the 7-Eleven U.S. home office is in Texas, but it's a Japanese-owned company. and that, like in their current purchase of from Marathon Gas, the Speedway gas stations, that's coming up as an issue, is that money is actually going out of the U.S. So from a legislative thing, it doesn't necessarily make a difference in what we do, but it does give us an additional talking point. Doug Smith, has anyone profiled to see which U.S. are either owned a franchise? There aren't that many of them, and the hard part is they're usually not active in the business. We had in Louisiana, we had a Subway owner. I'm drawing a blank on his name. He actually went into work in the Trump administration. We have a McDonald's franchisee. For some reason, I'm thinking he's in Oklahoma, who is there. Interesting enough, the previous acting chief of staff, I'm drawing a blank on his name, to Trump, from South Carolina. God, I can't remember his name right now.
I just lost it too.
He was a franchisee at one time, and I'll never forget in his office one time when he was a member of the House of Representatives, telling me that the problem with this building is not enough people have ever signed the front of a paycheck. They all sign the back of a paycheck, so they really don't see it very well. So there's not a whole lot. And then what even gets more interesting, when we kind of complained when it was an AAFD sponsored bill in 2014 that Governor Brown vetoed in California. Well, Governor Brown's wife used to be the franchisor attorney at
Jack in the Box.
Jack in the Box, yeah. So usually the legislators tend to be more franchisor side, that they've come out of the franchisor side, not that many franchisees, or they were very short time. And actually Holden in California, who drove that bill, he was the majority leader at the time. He was a Subway franchisee in the early 90s. So you do get a little mix. There's not a big number, unfortunately.
Keith, I know you're looking at other questions, and I'm not now, but we talked a little bit ago about the number of senators and congressmen that are engaged, perhaps on boards or whatever, of various private equity companies. You mentioned about Mitt Romney as being one of being a reason that private equity is hard to focus on.
Right. So Mitt Romney, obviously Bain Capital, which has been involved. In fact, they're involved in Subway right now. We don't know, when it's a private company, it's hard. We don't even know what level they're involved in, whether they own 25% of the company or they're just there consulting. We don't know. But, private equity, a lot of the big private equity firms have huge lobbying budgets, and that's tough to fight. Yeah, look, we're never going to have the money. We're never going to be able to outspend the opposition. But we have the people in every congressional district in this country, and that's what we need to take advantage. Of course, Bob, you've heard me say this. I've always joked, if I could just get $5 from every franchisee in the country, we'd have so much money to lobby, we wouldn't know what to do with it. And you think about $5 a year from every franchisee in the country, what that would do. But that's not necessarily possible. But our advantage is feet on the ground, and we've got to take advantage of that.
That very true statement, and very a very sad commentary as well. But when we first started the AAFD was imagined really to be totally focused on legislation. At the time, this was back in 1992, the IFA had a published budget of $13 million in their coffers, and we had about $13.50. So in terms of economics, there was no way to compete in that area. We did a pivot to focusing on empowering franchisee associations, and trying to what we brandish still today, and it's still a big tenet of what we do, called marketplace solutions. And we really want to solve our problems at the bargaining table. That's the really where you would like to do it, so that each negotiated deal is both balanced. But the threat of legislation, and in some instances, and in many instances, the actual need for legislation is absolutely for real. And Keith has been just sort of out there on his own, but doing an amazing work. But both, he's been talking primarily at the federal level, but he's engineered great advancements in various states, some states that we wouldn't even think we would be in at this level. So we all, as franchisees, owe Mr. Miller an enormous debt of gratitude for the work that he's doing, and we need to get behind him. We need to rally our troops. We need for each of the people on this call to take back to your chapters the importance of, it's making a phone call, it's making a text message at this point, and sometimes it's writing a letter. But this is something we can absolutely do, and I think we need to take a shot at getting not $5 but $50 from as many franchises, because if we could get 10% of the franchisees to give us $50 each, you'd have that same number, right? So,
it's funny. I jokingly say, well, this work keeps me off the streets when I'm not making sandwiches, right? I was talking to Carol one day in Cortez Masto's offices, and people chuckle at this, and I forget what I said, something about the franchise industry. And this guy goes, well, the problem is you franchise owners need to be organized and have someone who fights your cause in Washington, D.C. And Carol goes, well, what did you tell him? I go, I really didn't say anything, because it'd be pretty hard to convince the guy that the person making his sandwich was probably the most connected inside the D.C. Beltway in the county. And I'm sitting there making a sandwich. It'd be pretty hard to convince him of that. So I figured I didn't even want to start.
very
Thanks,
true.
Jonathan. All right. If I don't have any more questions, we'll close this out, and let me check at what time we're back, because I don't want people to miss the video from Schakowsky, so that's at 1:30 Eastern time, 10:30 West Coast time. We'll probably play the video a couple minutes in. The video will have some very nice announcements.
And some discussion
And
following.
then we'll discuss afterwards, right? So Bob, you'll probably be in on that session too, and actually even our conference chairs. I'd like to sit in on that session so we could have a little discussion on what that brings, especially with the lawyers, a couple lawyers maybe on it, because what she's going to announce, they might want to make a comment on. All right.
So if we are, if we're concluded, it looks like we're in adjournment, and Amy, correct me, it looks for about an hour. Is that right? At 10:30? No.
Yep. 1 hour.
Less than an hour.
Hour and 6 minutes. No, 10:30 or 10:30 or an hour and 6 minutes.
Okay. So we're in adjournment. Everybody go get your favorite lunch or refreshment, and we'll see you guys back here in an hour.
Yeah, it's not 5 o'clock anywhere, so don't get that yet.
Yeah.
Jimmy.
Well, it's 5 o'clock somewhere, but
yeah, not in this country.
The Atlantic.
All right. We'll see everyone in about an hour. Thank you.
I know.